No, I want to start by just expressing my gratitude to the International Society for Intelligence Research, to its distinguished membership, and to our hosts this year, Drs. Michelle Luciano and Tim Bates. I cannot imagine a better circumstance with which to undertake not only my first visit to Scotland, but to this venerable location, the Royal Society of Edinburgh, and to this remarkable gathering of people. Thank you very much for having me. No one would mistake me for a journalist, I can promise you. Most days I'm quite happy if someone mistakes me for a passable social scientist. Previous honorees like Susan Pinker and Alice Drager cast a long shadow as it is, and the namesake of this award, Constance Holden, embodied science journalism at its finest. Writing about science for the public isn't something I've really even done for that long. Most of what I've written in my career has been primarily for all of you, published in peer-reviewed journals, book chapters, written for researchers and scientists. Yet this foray into public science has offered a pretty unique opportunity to speak to interested lay people, many of whom can't access the pages of our journals. So one thing I learned very quickly is that you have to press a slightly different skill set into service when addressing a broader audience. There's an imperative to simplify. Of course, this should never mean running roughshod over the important details, of which there are many. Yet, as someone far wiser than me once said, if you can't explain it simply, you don't really understand it. So there's been some superb science writing about our topic, human intelligence, some of it by folks gathered here today. And like other topics, there is no shortage of misinformation, confusion, and outright falsehood that often proliferate the pages of magazines and newspapers. Still, what I've realized is that the science writing I enjoy the most addresses topics that are often complicated, potentially controversial, as Tim was alluding to, yet clearly important and impactful. And it distills them in such a way that it excites the reader. It provokes not only the layperson, but also the grizzled expert, moving them to think about an old topic, maybe their topic, in a brand new way. In some cases, and I think the best cases, it coaxes a new mind into a field that they may otherwise never have wandered into. Contrary to my own initial intuitions, the most fertile ground for igniting a passion in your audience didn't seem to reside in covering the most attention-grabbing headlines, the newest finding to emerge from science or nature. In fact, if the replication crisis has reminded us of anything, it's that attention-grabbing headlines don't always end up being correct. So instead, what has captivated me the most is when an author can take the most basic bits of knowledge about a topic, and through sheer force of will, it seems, they would entice me to be excited about them. So this approach has an added benefit, I think. It cuts through controversy and misinformation. It reminds us of why we ended up in our chosen profession to begin with, which is always nice. So I'm going to suggest that the topic of intelligence, among all other topics in the social and psychological sciences, is poised for a revival of interest. It's poised for a revival of excitement, not just in the lay public, but also in the academy as well. Richard Feynman, as my title alludes to, Nobel Prize-winning physicist, one of our most beloved science writers, I think has provided us with a roadmap to that end. So it was because of Feynman that I developed a love of physics. Sadly, just not the requisite G to add anything to that field, unfortunately. Years ago, I happened to pick up Feynman's 6 Easy Pieces, though, a book based on his lecture series at Caltech. If you haven't read it, I can't recommend it enough to you. In his preface, Feynman tells us pretty early what his aim is to immediately grab the attention of bright students and get them excited about the grander vision of the field. Excited enough that they would persist in their studies and weather the tedious coursework required along the way. Like any good academic, Feynman was worried about his enrollment numbers. Can't blame him. The ancillary goal he would add, though, was to sneak in enough of the mystery, the problems yet to be solved, that even the most gifted of the students taking his course would latch to something. So the corralling of foundational knowledge is what he called the easy pieces. It included discussions of atoms, energy, and gravitation. He had 6 easy pieces in total. No doubt about it, it was elementary by design, but it was exciting to me. We have over a century of research, extremely well replicated research in many cases, at our backs, and some incredible discoveries currently being made on the horizons in this field. And we have plenty of unanswered questions. So it's what I've called the easy pieces of intelligence that allow us to discuss the harder pieces of intelligence. And it's there, I think, we can show a new generation of students and journalists that our topic is foundational to understanding the human condition. Equally important, we can continue to abate the misunderstanding and the myth that sometimes assail our topic, even still today. So after some thought, I've arrived at 4 easy pieces. Feynman only had 2 more than us, so I think we're in pretty good shape. So the first easy piece is that intelligence is a familiar part of everyday life. As a result, it's easy to define. It's a set of skills that infuse and fuel our ability to navigate our world. It's our ability to problem solve, to learn, to organize bits of information that otherwise seem disparate and incongruous. It allows us to put them together in a way that's coherent and that makes sense. One of my favorite quotes from the book, 6 Easy Pieces, Feynman notes the following: experiment is the sole judge of scientific truth, but what is the source of knowledge? Where do the laws that are to be tested come from? Experiment itself helps produce these laws in the sense that it gives us hints, but also needed is imagination to create from these hints the great generalizations, to guess at the wonderful, simple, but very strange patterns beneath them all, and then to experiment to check again whether we've made the right guess. So the lectern I'm standing at is solid, but it's also shot through with empty space. It's comprised of atoms. We know this bizarre truth because, as Feynman notes, we have the ability to experiment, to imagine, to theorize about how the world might exist, even at levels that we can't observe with our eyes. Intelligence is not the only trait that underpins this incredible ability, an incredible luxury of our species, in fact, but it seems blazingly obvious that it's foundational to the entire enterprise of that, the enterprise that Feynman's talking about. At the same time, it's not just the ability to do experimental physics or algebra or calculus or linear regression. It's certainly involved in all of those things, yet it also powers our ability to master pressing problems out in the real world, absent any formal schooling or instruction in some cases. To loosely paraphrase a prior eminent intelligence researcher, life is an intelligence test. And if some social science work is to be believed, it may become increasingly important in an economy that's ever shifting towards cognitive innovation as a primary means of making one's way in the world. So in short, the first easy piece is that intelligence is something we already have an intuitive understanding of. Perhaps more importantly, it's a quality that's not only fundamental to navigating our world, but it provides us the ability to make sense of the world. Our home planet is less mysterious, less frightening, and made all the more amazing by our capacity to understand it. The second easy piece is that we know how to measure intelligence. In fact, we do it quite well. None of us, I think I can safely say, think that a given intelligence test is free of measurement error, perfectly reliable, or completely valid. But in psychology, and indeed all of the social sciences, you would be hard-pressed, I think, to find better measurement tools than the ones used by intelligence researchers. Our audience audiences, whoever they might be, should know that. The fact that the public and even some academics sneer at measures psychometricians have spent decades refining is unfortunate. It can be fixed, however, and many of you are well on your way toward repairing the image of intelligence testing in the public eye, so I would encourage you just keep doing what you're doing. Third easy piece is that we know where intelligence comes from, the brain. Divine revelation, divination, astrological insights, the soul, all have been forced to take a back seat to neurological functioning, gray and white matter distributions, and speed of connectivity, among other key qualities whenever we're talking about where insights about the world come from. We can count as an important victory, in fact, that most people now acknowledge that to alter the brain, at least past a certain point, is to affect our ability to think deeply, problem solve, and to navigate the world effectively. Many of you, in fact, as we've heard in many talks already, are hard at work studying intelligence across the lifespan. You do this in order to better understand how, in part, how cognitive abilities break down over time. This work is essential. It's essential if we ever hope to delay or even reverse the savaging effects that aging has on our intellectual lives. The import of this work is magnified by the fact that the ability to understand complex topics, to make use of technology, and to problem solve don't become less important as we get older, they become more important. And especially as we're forced to confront difficulties with our health, to make decisions about treatment for ourselves or for loved ones, this topic matters all the more. Preserving our cognitive abilities is paramount for living a good life, and it's a topic that bleeds into medicine, public health, gerontology, and a host of other fields. So at its core, intelligence research is brain research. And because our brains represent the hub of our emotional and social lives, we all have skin in this part of the game. So the fourth and final easy piece is that intelligence varies. And again, this sounds banal, right? But it's key. Humans differ in their intelligence levels much in the same way that we differ in our personalities, our heights, weights, religious preferences, political leanings. Difference, variation, is nothing to be maligned. It's simply a feature of the process that landed us at this point. Make no mistake, this is easier to discuss for some traits than others. And intelligence, by virtue of that first easy piece we were talking about, is a bit trickier to talk about when paired with the issue of variation. It's important, though, because variation in intelligence is linked to variation in life success. Difficult as it may be, it's nonetheless an easy piece, simply because we have such a rich and clear understanding not only that variation exists, but we also understand the sources of variation. Intelligence adheres to the 4 laws of behavior genetics. One could make a convincing case at this point, however, that the most interesting point here has nothing to do with laws 1, 2, and 4, which sort of center on the role of genes and early life experiences, but rather centers on the 3rd law, which is that unique experiences, unique environments that individuals encounter always seem to explain a significant portion of the variation for measures of intelligence. We don't fully know what this means, what constitutes these mysterious non-shared effects, but we know they always seem to matter. What if this knowledge void happens to coax an undecided college major into the field of psychometrics or intelligence or differential psychology? What if that little piece of the unknown attracts the next Ian Deary or the next Tim Bates? That would be a great victory for us all. Being interested in genetics, though, I can't help but mention a portion of a portion of the variance attributable to genetic differences, something I find fascinating. Currently, we await the publication of the first study to include a sample of over 1 million participants in a genome-wide analysis of one outgrowth of intelligence, educational attainment. To date, we have already made really remarkable headway in not only discovering but replicating SNPs associated with intellectual functioning. Doubtless, we're poised to discover even more with this new paper, as well as the ones that will follow in its wake. Heritability estimates that were once missing will be, currently are being filled in. I can't imagine a more exciting time to be working in and around the field. I can't imagine a reason not to tell the public all that we can about it. More importantly, I can't imagine a scenario in which this easy piece fails to excite at least some promising new scientist, convincing her to start turning locks on the not-so-easy pieces that still populate our field. So there might be other easy pieces. I certainly wouldn't suggest to you that my list is exhaustive. Those just happen to be the 4 that, after about a century of research, seem to emerge time and again as pretty robust. I also happen to find them particularly exciting because their simplicity sort of masks how important they really are for the human experience. They have a depth of relevance that's really remarkable for all of us. So I'm persuaded, at least in the confines of my own mind, that others will feel the same way about that too. As Feynman noted, and as I alluded to, though, the easy pieces are really just a portal to the harder pieces. There are a lot of harder pieces we could talk about, many of which are discussed from the start to the end of this conference. For example, just to give a couple of examples, how do we move from knowing that a given set of SNPs, a given set of genes, is correlated with intelligence, to understanding the functional pathway that gets you from genotype to phenotype? How do we square this with arguments about omnigenetics and how those effects matter for complex outcomes? What were the selective pressures that sculpted human intelligence? I find that particularly fascinating as well. How did these pressures come to bear over the history of our species? Why do we even have something known as G? Why does performance across intelligence tests correlate at all? These are all compelling questions. They're deeply complex questions. And they, along with a host of others that we could remain here listing out all day, comprise the harder pieces of intelligence research. What I want to do, though, as I sort of begin the task of closing the lecture, is indulge myself just a little bit and talk about one harder piece of intelligence research, primarily because I think it's at the core of what it means to be human. And so just bear with me a bit. I'm going to talk about consciousness. So what quality of human experience is more fundamental than consciousness? It's that feeling, sort of to borrow a metaphor from the neuroscientist Sam Harris, of riding around sort of perched behind your eyeballs, taking in the world. It's experiencing the redness of red or the sunset on the moors. I mean, what would life be like without those things? They seem foundational to so much of what we encounter across our lifespan. The things that really seem to matter, right? The day you took your wedding vows, the day you graduated from college, the day a child was born. These are huge. These cut to the core of what it means to live life. As a topic in the academy and outside it, consciousness resided for a great many years firmly with the philosophers and the theologians, understandably so, at least in the beginning. As you all, of course, know, the last several decades have witnessed a surge of consciousness research cutting across a variety of fields. So I can recall the first time I spent more than just a passing minute contemplating the topic. I happened to read a passage, it's probably one that you all know quite well. from Nobel laureate Francis Crick. So the astonishing hypothesis is that you, your joys and your sorrows, your memories and your ambitions, your sense of personal identity and free will are in fact no more than the behavior of a vast assembly of nerve cells and their associated molecules. So as is typical of good science writing, I had never seen this idea rendered so naked and so bare in just this way. So we could dispense with talk of souls and of mystery, zombies. We could do away with that when it came to consciousness, and we could talk about brains, and we could talk about nerve cells. We can talk about signal pathways and on down the list. And that's precisely what's happened. Tools of neuroscience, cognitive science, computer science, artificial intelligence, all of them have been pressed into service to try and understand that topic. And we've made progress. At least most of us agree that the topic of consciousness is a scientific one, it's not a spiritual one. Consciousness is a product of something the brain is doing. To throw the power switch on the brain is to turn off the movie that's playing in your head. We have cogent theories of consciousness. Attention schema theory, integrated information theory. We could list others as well. That's not to stake one out that I think is leading the pack in terms of viability, but we certainly have them, which is a nice luxury, something to test. Indeed, regardless of which theory you happen to favor, it's pretty clear that consciousness resides in the realm of brain science, and I think it's there where it needs to meet up with intelligence research. So what's the connection with intelligence and consciousness? I don't have the foggiest idea. I'm not going to stand here and try and convince you that I do. But I want to nibble around the edges a bit, maybe with the hopes that it will attract someone with higher G than me to try and sort out the answer to the question. So I recently wrote a paper expanding on an idea from Doug Hofstadter, who's a Pulitzer Prize-winning cognitive scientist. He wrote a book called The Strange Loop. Hofstadter pondered the following. Now, just note, when he uses the word soul, he's taking a little literary license. He's referring to consciousness. He said the following: there's an average tallness for adults, but there's also considerable spread around that average. Why should there not likewise be an average degree of souledness for adults, plus a wide range around that average? Maybe, as for IQ, going as high as 150 or 200 Honeckers in rare cases, and down to 50 or lower in others. Honeckers, and by the way, if you haven't read the book, is a reference to measuring consciousness as well. It's a word that Hofstadter uses. So a lot like when I read Francis Crick's astonishing hypothesis, I was sort of floored by this because I had never thought about it in just this way. I spent the next several months, in fact, thinking about that and little else, which is, I don't know that that's a great quality of mine, but that was what happened. So I'm not going to hammer you with the details of that particular paper. Essentially, I argued, though, that consciousness, however we might measure it, does in fact vary across individuals in the population, like height and weight and personality and intelligence. Moreover, I argued that variation in consciousness, like variation across virtually every other complex human traits, accords with the 4 laws of behavior genetics. And just trust me when I tell you, the case I made in that paper is knocked down. You don't even have to read it. You can just take my word for it. I got it right. So, in the time I spent working on that paper, though, another idea started to sort of germinate. What, if anything, did consciousness have to do with intelligence? Sadly, there's not a lot out there on the topic. Richard Heyer, in his excellent recent primer on intelligence and neuroscience, published a couple years ago, spent time sort of musing about this topic, intelligence and consciousness, and also intelligence creativity. As many of you may know, Rich did some of the neuroimaging work on the topic to try and sort of localize at least a few of the regions of the brain implicated in conscious awareness. So quite a bit of work has followed in recent years, providing us with what we now call sort of the neural correlates of consciousness. Not surprisingly, many of these regions, these NCCs, are implicated in intelligence. So what are some of the other reasons to suspect some intersection between the topics? I think it's uncontroversial to say that as we age, our conscious experiences change, right? Certainly from when we were younger. This reality is rendered all the more stark when we observe the ravages of neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's. So it's doubtless true that patients suffering this malady are conscious. It's like something to be them, to paraphrase Thomas Nagel. But what it's like to be them now seems likely not what it was like to be them before the disease. Cognitive abilities, intelligence levels have gone down. It's unlikely that they're going to learn a new language or a mathematical skill set. Intuitive solving of problems is rendered impossible in some cases. So we continue to nibble around the edges of this topic in the study of intelligence and Alzheimer's disease. At a minimum, there seems to be an inverse correlation between early life intelligence and later Alzheimer's. Something about the nature of intelligence and how it's instantiated in the brain seems in some ways to combat certain aspects of the disease. Beyond that, it's difficult to say very much more at all without venturing too far into speculative waters. Yet the relationship between intelligence and various degenerative disorders seems likely to shed light on whether intelligence intersects at all with how human beings generate conscious awareness. So let me switch gears briefly and think about this from a different angle. So have you ever met a machine that's smarter than you are? Well, in some sense, every one of us have. Presumably, most of us have smartphones. If you don't, God bless you. Hang in there. Keep trucking along. I do not blame you. But the raw computing power in your phone surpasses anything locked away in your skull. Tools like Watson and Siri are at your disposal to do with whatever you please. Search troves of data, answer any question, work out any mathematical computation. And if you were ever convinced you truly mastered chess, I would wager to bet even the version of Deep Blue that beat Garry Kasparov would make short work of you too. It certainly would me. And yet, as Hofstadter has noted time and again, going back to Douglas Hofstadter, these machines aren't really thinking, nor are they really intelligent in the sense that we are. They're brute force titans. They crunch algorithms, crushing through bits of information to accomplish whatever it is the goal that we set for them. But can we imagine a truly conscious machine? Can you imagine a machine that you're convinced has experiences and feelings and emotions, one that intuits the meanings of your body language, your voice inflection, one that thinks recursively along with you, yet one that lacks what we would recognize as human intelligence? If you run that thought experiment, can you imagine such a machine? I have a hard time doing that. It seems difficult to contemplate a machine like that, one that's conscious but not intelligent in the way that we are, in the way that we think about intelligence. To the extent that we can engineer machines that actually do embody human intelligence, surely we have some Westworld fans in the room, so you can sort of envision what that might look like. We might backdoor ourselves into understanding if and how what we define as intelligence is interlocked with our conscious experiences. Just to clarify, I'm not suggesting that the two are the same by any stretch, only that they're related. I think they are, but even being proven wrong would be a pretty exciting journey to undertake. So, the long and short of what I wanted to emphasize in my talk in discussing the easy problems, a snippet of what I think are some pretty interesting harder problems, the broader point is that our field has something truly great to offer. That's not a grandiose thing to say, it's just true. We study a core trait that fits into a mosaic of traits that make the human experience what it is. Any fulfillment that Feynman students derived from taking his class, or that people like me derived from reading his book, understanding some arcane physics topic, that was a result in great measure of our intellectual capacity to learn. So our ability to understand the world doesn't mean that we get the answer right the first time. It means that we keep trying variations of the puzzle until the pieces align themselves, until they finally click into place. As Feynman noted, we imagine, we experiment, and we course correct. We do that until those puzzle pieces fall together. So in many core respects, that is what intelligence is. It's the ability to manipulate the puzzle pieces until they finally and satisfactorily fall into place. Our collective lives on the planet, in fact, constitute, I think, probably the most important intelligence test of all, and we'll need all of our collective cognitive energies to preserve our home and each other moving forward. There's no shortage of new challenges that will arise, but I'm confident that the topic we study is what will allow us to overcome them. So whether your focus is on aging, or child development, or educational attainment, or like me, violence, crime, and aggression, or some other aspect of intelligence, your work is important. Make no mistake, and the public should know about it. The elephant lurking in the room, obviously, and Tim alluded to this as well, is that this could be a difficult topic to broach, right? Not at a gathering of sort of like-minded individuals like this, but talking more broadly to colleagues in the academy, to other disciplines, or writing about the topic for the public. It's often not easy. There's a lot of misunderstanding and misinformation that still persists about our chosen topic. And indeed, even university-educated psychology students, as Professor Russell Warren's recent paper demonstrated, are sometimes exposed to blatant untruths about the field in their introductory textbooks. That's quite troubling, especially in 2018. It's never too late to right the ship. We have the easy pieces of intelligence. That's a huge boon for us. Other fields should be so lucky. As Feynman demonstrated, it's those very pieces, the easy pieces, the banal, the boring, the simple pieces, the ones we take for granted, that stoke the appetite for the harder ones. The whole entire reason why we're here, answering the questions about intelligence that remain very much up for debate. It's those harder pieces that have the potential to unlock deeply mysterious insights about what it means to be human. And I think as a field, that makes us incredibly lucky. So I want to again express gratitude for this opportunity. This is not something I ever expected to get to do, not only as a criminologist, but just as a person from a town of about 600 people where farming was the primary way to make a living. So to get to come and visit a city like Edinburgh, to speak in a venue like this, is truly an honor. And so thank you for that. Thank you for coming to the lecture. Thank you.